1900 years ere seed sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the show. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. So today we are back to speak about something that we've discussed a number of times on the channel, which is the famous night of Al-Qadr. And we have added a couple of extra things. It is going to be a recap with a few additional commentaries on that particular surah. With us today, as always, Kash. Hello, Kash. How are you doing?
Hi, JC. Doing well. How are you?
I'm very well. Looking forward to this one.
I am. We're talking about supposedly, if correct me if I'm wrong, JC, this is meant to be a verse about the moment when the revelation came to Muhammad in the cave, right?
Yes, there are a number of surahs at the end of the Quran that mentioned bits and pieces of that full story. One of them is Surah 96. It's supposed to be the first surah to be revealed when it says, like, read in the name of your Lord. That makes it into the story of the night of Al-Qadr. And then the surah itself, Surah Al-Qadr, which is unusual because it has quite a bit of information that we don't actually find anywhere else. So maybe we can understand a little bit better how they created this story based on what the Quran says. So let's actually see what the Quran has to say about this surah, shall we?
Yeah, happy to. So we have a cooler
So,
picture here, and we almost see a little bit of a Satan figure, almost a devilish figure there in the back.
yeah, well, basically, the interpretation of what happens according to the standard Islamic narrative is the image on the right, is the cave of Hira, and something that doesn't introduce himself trying to choke Muhammad. But we will get to the actual hadith.
Wait,
And
he doesn't. Wait, he doesn't introduce himself. That's so true, and that's so rude.
yes, I think I could be wrong, but I think in the Bible, every time that an angel appears to someone, the first thing that they do is to say, don't be afraid. I come in the name of the Lord, or I come from God, or something like
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Because if you
Well,
see an
they
entity,
they reassure the person, right? Because surely it's extremely fearful. Like that's terrifying. If you were to see one of these creatures, these angels, how they're described, and that's terrifying, right? So first they reassure the person. They say, "Do not be afraid," and then they introduce themselves, right? They make themselves known.
yes, that would be the polite thing to do. Even if you say I'm from planet Vulcan, you need to say who you are, otherwise the person is going to be very, very afraid. Although that's actually not what happens in the standard Islamic narrative. The
Mm,
the who that entity is gets established later by deduction, and he's not even given a name. But anyway, let's have a look at what this one surah actually talks about, which is Surah 97, and is supposed to be describing the events of that night. Again, very different to Surah 96 that begins with read in the name of your Lord, which that's not what it says, but never mind, according to the narrative, that is the first words that are spoken to Muhammad. But then when we get to this one, it's almost like a hymn. It really has a bit of that feeling when you actually read it. So it says, indeed, we sent it down during the night of decree. And what can make you know what is the night of decree? The night of decree is better than 1,000 months. So we're already past the middle point of the surah, and we have learned nothing except that there is something called the night of decree. So unless it is incredibly grossly mistranslated, we know that there is one night and it is very important. I mean, it really takes like 3 out of 5 verses in this surah. So when we see what else the surah has to say about it, it says, the angels and the spirit descend therein by permission of their Lord for every matter. It's like great. And it ends with, peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Now, something that I find very curious about this surah is that it is just very clear to any Christian who were to read this in uh, completely out of context, if they didn't know that Islam was a thing, if they read this, they would immediately assume that this is talking about the birth of Jesus. Why? Well, 3 verses is talking about something happening at night, also that the angels and the spirit descend. There are accounts in the Bible about a heavenly host singing and approaching shepherds, I think it is, in the fields, and so on. And also the end. Peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Everybody has heard Christmas carols and stuff that they have this exact theme. This, in fact, actually sounds very much like that. So, but when we go to the standard Islamic narrative, all of this is gone. Something that every Christian would recognize as being about Jesus, we get to the standard Islamic narrative and is very, very different. For example, we can have a look at the tafsirs. These are the tafsirs about the verses that talk about better than 1,000 months, which, as you would imagine, is not descriptive enough. What does it mean better than 1,000 months? What makes 1,000 months good? What is going on? So when you go to the tafsirs, you can see how they really tried very, very hard to shoehorn all of their beliefs already up to that point into the surah. So in here, it lists everybody who has narrated this thing, and it says the Prophet of Allah mentioned an Israelite who carried weapons and fought for the sake of Allah for 1,000 months. 1,000 months is 83 years, or about 83 years. So that's a lot of warring to do. The Muslims were astonished to hear this, and so Allah revealed law. We revealed it on the night of predestination, and what will convey unto thee what the night of power is. The night of power is better than 1,000 months. He said, this is better than the months in which that man carried his weapons and fought. Now, these words were never spoken out loud. These things were never transmitted. It's just as silly. As we've seen, the surah is talking all about Jesus, but when we are looking at the tafsirs, they need to cope. They need to
This
tell
is,
something that
JC, this makes me mad. Does it make you mad? It actually makes me mad. Just even like I'm sitting here. So they have something that they can't explain because they've rendered the verse in a certain manner, and I have my questions about the word for month here as well as thousand even, and for them to then read it in that manner and then write this to then answer the question, okay, like you put forward initially, like this is a logical issue here. Why would God speak in a manner where he says that something is better than 1,000 months? Okay, what do you, okay, so one day is one night is better than 1,000 months. Okay, it's very good. This is a great month. But why speak in that manner? And for that to be answered and covered, I would say covered up, by saying that there was a war dude, not naming anyone, just saying there was an Israelite who carried weapons like you should for me, is the implication here, right? Like we honor the man who fights for 83 years on behalf of us. This is so gross, no?
Yeah, and of course they have to shoehorn the whole thing. They give the full chain of transmission, which never happened, and they need to put Muhammad, Muslims, Allah, the whole thing. Is like, well, just read the surah. Like this has nothing to do with any of that. Actually, that sentence, better than 1,000 months, we're going to see later in a little bit how it is not just misunderstood. It is very purposely taken completely out of context, and then they tell you this, and there will be something else actually in Sharia that mentions about this particular verse. But yeah, if I ask you, Cash, what is better than 1,000 months? It's like, what would be your answer? What would you think? Something that could happen in a single night that is better than 83 years of your
Yeah,
life?
but why is I would offer the counterpoint of things that are like the greatest things ever can happen in one evening, and then comparing that to 1,000 months where nothing happens, right? Like time is in that sense relative to what happens in that time. Nothing interesting happens in 1,000 months. I'd rather be there for that one night. right?
Yeah, but apparently it's all about fighting. When we go to other tafsirs, you will have something actually similar. So you have here Ibn Abbas. He then explained it's married by saying the night of power is better than 1,000 months. He says works in this night are better than works performed in 1,000 months, which do not include such a night. And it's like, once again, this makes absolutely no sense the moment that you're thinking about it. So you have one tafsir, somebody's trying to make up this story about is based on a guy that fought for 1,000 months, and that's why this night is better than doing that. And then we get to this tafsir, and he's like, no, the works that you performed in that night
What works?
is better than the works that you would do in 1,000 other months, which do not include such a night. And it's like, sorry, you have to just put that date on the calendar and make sure that you do the most important work in the year on that day. For what is going on? It
But
makes no
also,
sense.
JC, this is suggest the idea here is that according to the tradition, the night in which the Quran was revealed, where then, we had read, I can't read, read, I can't read, read, I can't read, with squeezing as well involved, right? And then running to Khadija, okay, is this a real revelation? Sit on my lap, the whole shebang, right? What work? Like I can understand someone saying, okay, this was the beginning of something great, and then many things were revealed, but this was the beginning, right? Okay, sure. But if you're articulating the idea that this night, right, that there were better works performed than in 1,000 months, unspecific, what are you even talking about? What works were performed? Verifying that it was supposedly an angel by sitting on laps? No,
No, it is
that's
about
absurd.
your works on that night. They are more valuable than the works that you would do in 1,000 months, but not in that night. But you're right. They are already twisting. The verse says how
I
important that
see.
night is. But
Right. So it's
then
in
when you go,
the remembrance of that night. So when they repeat it on the calendar, you mean?
yes, and we will see one
Okay.
extract on Sharia that actually, yes, reinforces this. So it is first about how important that original night is, and that then becomes, no, that means the works that you have to do in that night, they are that
Hmm.
important. I mean, not the day
Right.
before, not the day after, you need to get the calendar right, and that night is that important. And we're going to talk about the story in just a second.
JC,
Another tafsir.
it would be like me having a tradition where I said that when you do charity on the day of the crucifixion, then it's like multiplied by 10x in value. So if I was like some kind of Christian sect, which was very sort of works-based salvation, I can see it tending towards that direction, if you know what I mean. Where you have like a works-based salvation, but the works you do are super, super valuable on the night of the crucifixion.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, perfect example. So if you were told that giving to charity is multiplied a lot more if you do it on Christmas Day or on Easter or something like that, and it's like that's when you have to give to charity because it's uh, priced higher and it wouldn't
Yeah.
actually make any sense. It's like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But also
Mhm.
how unspecific it is, better than works performed. It's like, what works are you performing in the night of Al-Qadr? Well, for that, we have Sharia, and you will see the very important works that you have to do on that night. Mm? And
Mhm.
another one, exactly the same thing. So it just keeps reinforcing this. This one is actually a little bit different. It says, we sent Gabriel with the entire Quran to the scribes of the nether heaven on the night of power, on the night of judgment and decree. It is also said, this means on a night blessed with forgiveness and mercy, and then it was revealed to the prophet in installments. Now, this is coping on a whole different level. If you listen to the stories, you're going to have the stories that says the night of Al-Qadr is the night when the Quran was revealed. That story happens. But we know, according to the traditions, that the Quran was revealed over 22 years, basically in installments. So this tafsir tries to fix that problem and saying, okay, so if it was revealed in one night, but we also have been told that it took 22 years, how do we fix it? Okay, the Quran is given to Gabriel on that night in its entirety. You see how they actually make it clear, but he is then he gives the Quran to the scribes in the nether heaven. And it's like, what are you talking about? It's like, is this like an office building and you're actually just passing a memo around and then you give it to the prophet one piece at a time over 22 years? This guy actually made, this guy, whoever actually wrote this tafsir, the actual guy, was trying to fix that problem, because you have the problem of we sent it down during one night, and that is understood to be the Quran. And then you have the stories that says that it took 22 years. This guy tries to fix the problem. And you at home, you can actually decide if he successfully solved that problem or if he didn't. That
JC,
one's up to you to decide.
you know when someone lies, and also ourselves, because we're sinners like everyone, and then the lie, in order to keep the lie going, you have to add a bunch of new extra lies, right? To patch things up so that all the, because we're not perfect. Our first lie is never perfect. So you need to add more lies to then patch all the things. These extra little lies, that's what I feel is this whole tafsir and hadith tradition. That's the function of them. Because what I'm seeing is like this obvious problem, like you keep articulating, and then you have one tafsir who fixes one problem, but maybe causes another problem. Then you have another tafsir that fixes that one, and you have all these things that are just guys. We're trying to make sure that all this smooths over properly. Where the first initial lie is the misreading of the text itself, the arrogance to say I know how to read this when you really don't, or the malevolence to say I know what I want to read this as, despite knowing better, right? So you have two options. Either you have pride, and ignorance, or you have knowledge and malevolence. That's the that's the situation we have here. And reading these tafsirs really brings it home. It's so it's so egregious. Like, what is nether heaven, please? Nether evokes for me as a 1990s kid that what we're dealing with here is Minecraft, right? We're talking about Minecraft. No, but nether pulls to mind just hell in general. So what is a nether heaven? Is that we're like Hegel now, where we take our dialectic and we crash it together? But we're just doing oxymorons here? So it's so absurd what these people do. So it seems that we have Momo actually had a revelation installment plan. That's what we got from, at least from Ibn Abbas here with his tafsir, JC, it seems.
Yeah, and in order for him to come up with this tafsir, that means that there need to be some hadiths, that they are authentic, and that's actually the explanation. But like you said, it looks like there are many versions about everything. It does look like they create something, whether it is the hadith or the tafsir or whatever it may be at the right time, in order to justify a particular reading. And very often is because they want to hide something. Sometimes it's because they just don't understand it and they cannot get away with it. And then the next person has to fix that problem, that new plot hole that has been created, and down you go. And this happens in every single aspect of Islam. There are multiple stories about absolutely everything, so that you can actually defend any position using one thing. And if that one doesn't work, you will have another explanation to give. The problem is when you put them all together, you realize that they were just excuses being thrown out there. The very clear explanation of that is with the Qiraat, that they have something like 40 different explanations of the Qiraat, meaning the scholars don't know what the Qiraats are, what the readings are, or sorry, the Ahrufs, what the Ahrufs are. They have no idea. So they have 40 explanations. But if you go to your Imam and you speak with him, he's going to tell you exactly what it is. Don't worry, he's going to just tell you. And if you point out, no, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense because of this, he's going to drop the first argument, take a separate, different argument, and say, well, this one explains it. But the two that he has put forward, they are incompatible. You cannot have it both ways. And this happens a lot. With, I think the Surah really illustrates that very well, because they have to cope. We've shown before, it actually is just talking about Jesus. Also, this is remembering this. Okay, I had another one in here. It's the same thing, Night of Power, Night of Power. I didn't remember they actually had so many of these tafsirs. Anyway, we've spent way too much time with that. But this, so we have in the Quran these two verses in Surah 19. One is supposed to be about John the Baptist, and the other one is about Jesus. At the very least, this would be applied to Jesus once. It's possible that the other verse is as well mistranslated. But in this book, it already says that peace is on Jesus the day that he is born. Surah 97 ends with peace it is until the emergence of dawn. So once again, we have this connection between the typical view of the nativity and we have within the book putting together the word peace with the day that he's born, or in this case, the night. So we have these connections. The people who wrote this, they were familiar with quite a few stories, and we see them in different places. So if we had Surah 97 written in, I don't know, for example, a Hindu book, it would certainly mean something entirely different. It's talking about something that we wouldn't comprehend. The same if it was in some other weird religion in ancient times. However, this book is all about Jesus. They see him as the Messiah. So when you have a surah that ends with peace it is until the emergence of dawn, you are joining the dots. And we have another verse, this one here on the screen, the very least one, that actually makes it clear these people saw peace on the day that he was born, and the day that he dies, and the day he is resurrected is just a very clear verse as well, just talking about the death and resurrection, which of course they say no, that means when he returns in the future and then he dies and then he's resurrected. And it's like, yeah, that's coping. Right? Happy with that,
No, no,
Cash?
no. I have a Sahih hadith that tells me about, all I need to know to patch all that up that you just put in front of me as a problem for the Quran. I think, look, it's crazy. I think that the whole academic pursuit of Quranic studies since the beginning is about who can sophistically, like sophistry, make the case best that they understand the text. It's just like people competing about who can make the most compelling case, both rhetorically probably and also just on a material level by connecting things with linguistic roots and making cases thereof, while no one really understood what it said. And it's egregious, but that probably was the whole initial academic pursuit, which is why the fruits of that pursuit was this web of lies and cover-ups that we get from the Hadith and Tafsir tradition. Like all they're doing effectively is solving problems because they have this Quranic text and they have their interpretation thereof. There's huge problems with, the interpretation thereof, and they solve the problems by producing this textual material which solves the problems explicitly. So I'm just kind of mad, JC, I'd say.
Yeah,
Whenever I
well,
read Hadith and Tafsir, I get mad. I want to stay only with my baby. Quran is my baby, and I'm gonna figure my baby out. And all these smokes and mirrors traditions, they just make me mad.
well, I don't know why you speak in that manner. It's not like there are holes in the narrative or something. Now, you obviously remember Yasser Qadi, because first he basically disproved the whole preservation of the Quran, and now the Hadiths. So, yeah, the world is actually reaching that conclusion. I mean, the Muslim world, everybody outside of the Islamic circles, they know the problems with all of those things. But certainly, when now you have a scholar saying that, and there are scholars contradicting everything, there is you can only pull the wool over people's eyes for so long when you have internet and people are really being questioned over this, because it's an important matter. Most Muslims, they are in it, well, because of tradition, but also because they think that that's how they will gain salvation. So when you have one of your scholars saying, actually, all of these things that you've been told, not true, you will reconsider if you really believe in God, if that is the path to salvation or not, and they will actually demand an answer. And this is what is happening now with the internet. They demand answers, and the answers are not looking very, very good. But anyway, Surah 97. So,
Hmm.
Kash, would you like to? This one is another one that your favorite hadith. I mean, you have just said that you absolutely love hadiths. So maybe you would like to take care of this one.
That's so true, so true. I'll do that. What do you want me to read? Not the whole thing, surely.
Now, let me actually just highlight this is a hadith that we discussed before, because this one is the full thing that talks about then what happens in the cave of Hira. So Surah 97, Surah 96, the Ikra, 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 and then Surah 97 is supposed to be because of the events that happen here. So you can actually pick and choose
Mhm.
to tell what this peaceful night, better than 1,000 months, actually says according to this Sahih al-Bukhari hadith.
Okay, so one thing I also just noticed myself is, I mean, this is Hadith Bukhari, book 1, Hadith 3, right? So Momo was obsessed with the number 3, so maybe 3 is also there for that reason. But it's like right there in the beginning, right? This is like the foundational, almost the foundational text in some sense for the whole theology, right? And it goes through the story that most of us are familiar with, which is this idea that an angel, and here we read, the angel came to him, right? Which is interesting because the angel would be the one singular malak, and who is the one malak? It's Malak Yahweh, of course. So that would also line up with how it says that the truth descended upon him. Who is the truth? It is Christ. Who is Christ? The angel of the Lord, right? So you can sort of smell a lot of residual Christianity even in the Hadith traditions, which get fully compiled them around the 12th to the 14th century, something around that. And even in those, we still have this scent of Christianity. Anyway, point being is that we see in this story about how this the angel came to him and asked him to read. It seems the asking was quite forceful because then he was pressed, right? So, I do not know how to read. I am an ummi, which means it does not mean illiterate. Don't let them fool you. But anyway, I do not know how to read. And then he pressed him. He couldn't bear it anymore. He asked him to read again. I do not know how. And this goes on then for 3 times. 3 is a number that keeps coming up for some reason. I don't know. I wouldn't have the possible faintest knowledge of why. Maybe they were Trinitarian or something. And then we continue. We read about how he went to Khadija, and that's what I was talking about with the whole lap situation. Cover me, cover me. We all love a brave man who goes to his wife, cover me. They covered him, and his fear was over. Okay, very good. So the Khadija then, in this story, I'm not sure if we get the whole thing about dressed or undressed. No, that's a different hadith. It would be very strange for it to be hadith number 3, where they have those details. But we learned then a little bit about Waraka, who then we highlight there in yellow, would write the gospel in Hebrew, which is such a very strange statement to make in the 7th century, because at that point, who's dealing with the gospel in Hebrew? That's a very strange thing. It lines up with our knowledge from the church fathers and their citations, like Jerome especially, and their engagement with a textual tradition which was known as the gospel according to the Hebrews, which would mean the good news according to the Hebrews, which would mean the perspective of, quote unquote, the Hebrews, which was referring to the Nazarenes and Ebionites and the Elkosites in regards to their understanding of Christ's message. And it was a distinct textual tradition from the fourfold gospel that we know. They made claims that they had the original Hebrew Matthew. And the source of this gospel according to the Hebrews is attested by Jerome to have been written in Hebrew characters, but in the Aramaic language, which that's like total cosplaying. If you're going to talk in Aramaic, just write with Aramaic characters. Why are you cosplaying? Like, oh, this is the original, guys. I'm using the original characters. Look at me. It's absurd. So anyway, we have that. That's the link there. That's most certainly something that was going on here because the early Islamic quote unquote realm was very, very heavily Judaic, and most likely the gospel according to the Hebrew tradition played a role, whether that was some other text that was eventually destroyed, or maybe makes up parts of the Quranic tradition itself. That's up to be found. I'll read this one here. Waraka said, then, this is the same one who keeps the secrets. And they put in brackets because they're experts at bracketology. Angel Gabriel. So actually what it says is this is the one who keeps the secrets whom Allah has sent to Moses, had sent to Moses. Wait, who did Allah send to Moses? That was the angel of the Lord, right? Oh, that matches with the angel we read previously. It matches with the truth, which is the title applied to Jesus. And Jesus is therefore linked with the angel of the Lord and therefore applied to the angel of the Lord as well. And the angel of the Lord was the one who had been sent to Moses. Oh, so everything is now making sense. But of course, when a Muslim reads this, they don't understand any of these connections. And they see this as essentially their origin story of their religious tradition, coming, of course, in the cave of Hira, Gabriel to Muhammad. So Yeah, that's all I really would comment on so far, JC. What do you have to add?
Well, I would simply ask questions comparing this with with Surah 97. First of all, Surah 97 says that the angels and the spirit descend. Is in this hadith that angels and spirit descend?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that. I would say that. Angels doesn't quite work. And to answer Joshua, your common question, isn't Hebrew a type of Aramaic? Not really. So the way we would define it is there are two distinct languages which both share a Proto-Semitic root, essentially, a seed. And the roots, for the most part, are quite, they carry over, but there is distinction enough. It's a different language. So it's written, here's how it would work. How would I explain this? It's almost like using proto, or like, let's say, Old English characters. What comes to mind are these sort of runic symbols. It's been a while. We adopted the Roman alphabet very, very long, the Latin alphabet very, very long a time ago. But it would be like writing English but using the characters of a old script form that we no longer use in a way. Because Aramaic was the common tongue of even the Jewish people, and they would still have liturgical use of Hebrew. So that would be not uncommon to have Hebrew characters in play, even in the 7th century. But it is essentially using a script form that is meant for another language, for a different language, I would say to because I'm coming from the perspective of affirming the fourfold gospel tradition, I would say that's like role playing. That's like writing in old script form to present as authoritative, which I think is then exploited by Luther, but that's a whole other topic.
Right. So still with this hadith, it's if we compare this with Surah 97, the Surah 97 says that the angels and a spirit descend, and you can say, okay, the spirit, yes, there you go. I mean, he doesn't introduce himself, but they figure out who he is when they speak with Waraka after a little while, but there is no angels mentioned. So that should definitely be in there. The other thing, peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Now, I think everything that Kash has explained from this hadith is this is not something that you would say it is peaceful. First, this spirit is pressing Mohammed and asking him to read, which he cannot do, which already creates some problems because at one point they are supposed to open his chest and give him the knowledge of God. So everything that he says is the words of God, but then they retain in the history that he just remained unlettered. It's like, well, the moment that he gets the knowledge of God and he's speaking every single word of God, he should be able to read and write better than anybody in history, but it didn't happen. But still with this, so the angels are not mentioned. It doesn't talk about something peaceful. He goes running to Hadija saying, cover me, cover me. This is in the hadith. It's like right there. So certainly it does not match what we have in Surah 97. Once again, all you have to do is read Surah 97 in any English translation in the original Arabic, and it will be clear. It's not telling the story that happens in the cave of Hira, like at all. It's something completely different. And I think I had another point to make. Hopefully, it will come back in a minute.
Well,
So we're gonna,
maybe the whole because you said it wasn't peaceful. Why? Because the angel squeezed him? Is that why?
yes, and because he runs away scared. I mean, he didn't even introduce himself, so he left the cave incredibly scared.
Well, I
So
mean, okay,
Buddha,
sure, but it's all subjective, no? Because maybe Momo, maybe he likes it rough. So never mind.
yeah, okay, that could be an explanation, but I don't think that hadiths actually talk about that. Could be wrong.
That's
And the other
wrong. They
thing as well,
do. They talk about the soot, okay? They have the the jinn, okay? We have that evidence, okay? Proof. This is the proof. I'll shut up now.
touche. Okay, that's very true. Now, I could be wrong about this statement. I think, well, Al-Qadr is supposed to be a night that falls within Ramadan, and unless I'm very much mistaken, the verses that talk about Ramadan, they never actually mention Al-Qadr, which if these stories were combined, they were together, and from the very start, there was this fasting period during the month of Ramadan, and Al-Qadr was in it, I think the Quran would make it clear. as well. But could be wrong, but Al-Qadr is not mentioned together with Ramadan. In fact, they are two different things, and then they bring them in as they are trying to patch all of these different stories together. And particularly with Surah 97, I think they did a very poor job, because all they had to do is, when they wrote this hadith, to say that this spirit appeared with angels around him, but they just made a boo-boo. And probably they shouldn't have put the whole thing about pressing him and asking him to read in that manner, because it contradicts the whole, peaceful thing. And the last thing, well, this one's, there were other things that we discussed before, as the angel. It is described as the angel that appeared to Moses, and that is the angel of the Lord. So we know that these stories were actually created at a point when they were still thinking very much about the angel of the Lord, very likely to be during Abdul Malik, or that time, or maybe hundreds of years later. Who knows? Now, last bit of information is this one. So from the Reliance of the Traveler, we go to particular extract there from the Night of Al-Qadr, so Laylat Al-Qadr, and at the very end you will see that it says that this is what the Prophet said: he who prays on the night of Al-Qadr in faith and expectation of its reward will be forgiven his previous sins. Now, that is a major problem for so many reasons. Well, first, we will need to find the hadith that says that, as one thing. Second, so if you are praying on that night, your sins are forgiven, just like that. When you pray simply so that your sins are forgiven. You don't
They're
pray
meant to
for
pray
your
every day, right?
friends.
They're meant to
Yeah,
pray
and
every
then,
day, right?
yeah,
Right?
why do you pray
Okay.
5 times a day, right?
Yeah, but also wouldn't this mean that they never miss the day and therefore they're forgiven every year?
Yeah, like how does it work? Yeah, you see the problem. Like, if in actual Sharia it says that praying on that night forgives your sins, is like, hang on a minute. So why do we pray the other nights? Is it just in case that you actually die at one point before the night of Al-Qadr, and you want to be up to that point, say, up to date with your prayers? But do they forgive your sins? But also, didn't we read in one of the tafsirs that says that it's about the works that you do, that the works that you do during the night of Al-Qadr, they are better than um, the works that you do for 1,000 months? We see
Mhm.
this incredible effort to patch up a surah that it is very clearly talking about Jesus, and they have
Yeah.
to just throw Muhammad and anything that they can at it. And this is something that happens a lot. If a Muslim goes to his imam and says, "Hey, I don't understand this," he's going to pick, depending on the circumstances, one thing. Maybe this one will be the relevant to tell him, or maybe it will be, "Oh no, this was because of a warrior that was doing this for 83 years of his life," or whatever it may be. Or, "No, you go and give to charity on that day, and it's worth more than if you did it any other time in the year." It doesn't matter. The point is to give a message to the Muslim so that he stays a Muslim, not realizing that the whole information makes no sense. The hadith contradicts the information in the Quran. You have to go to the tafsirs, who make a very poor job on this particular surah at explaining it, because you cannot explain something as clear as that one. There is much of the Quran, obviously, Kash, we are always working on the Quran and trying to unpick words that were translated wrongly, or they added the diacritics wrongly, or they changed them by adding the hamzas. Basically, the words that were there were something else, and that's pretty much the bulk of the work that we do. There are then all of these other verses where they mean nothing. They are incredibly vague. You can shoehorn any story into those verses and sell it, because they don't tell you names. Very often they don't tell you names. They don't tell you cities, places, times of the year. They don't tell you anything. It's just vague. But when you get to Surah 97, is not the same. It's actually not that vague. There are too many of these pieces of information that will make you figure out what that surah is about pretty much immediately. And in a book that is talking about Jesus all the time, you would make a conclusion very, very quickly. So that's why I think that this particular surah sticks out like a sore thumb, because it is not as vague as much of the other work. And you don't really need to even go and figure out the Syriac or the Hebrew or what other words are in there. Because if you just read it in the Arabic as it is, you can already see that it doesn't match the Hadiths, Sharia, the tafsirs, and the whole thing is coping. Now, that being said, the verses probably mean other stuff because everything that Kash and I are doing, we just keep seeing more and more Hebrew and Syriac and lots of other things. So there's a good chance that the original verse meant something else. But the beauty of this surah is you actually don't need to, because the way that it is written right now, it already proves all of those other things being wrong. It doesn't mean that's what it actually says. And as Kash and I we dig more into this, we will figure out the actual original meaning. But just as it is, it disproves the hadiths, the sirah, the Sharia, and the whole thing. That's why I really like this surah, and I look forward to finding out exactly what it meant. Oh,
Yeah,
so
JC, 1 second. This is the thing, to make it clear for everyone, basically, where we are at. I mean, at least me, but I also think JC. It's that what we're looking at when we deal with the Quran, even for presentations like this, is that, like, for example, for this presentation, we're just assuming a priori that there's nothing funny going on with the Rasam or what they select as the roots, the translations, the meaning they give to orthography and all this, right? But there are two levels to the text. One level is as it's read today, essentially. And you can get like pretty good results when you read St. Murad's translation, in the sense that pure honesty even cracks through the second layer, but not fully, because it's still assuming that it's all quote unquote Arabic. And the fact that we see all these words that are loan words from the Hebrew, from the Gez, predominantly Syriac, but it's a you know, non-irrelevant amount of taking from the Gez. It's a non-irrelevant amount of taking from the Hebrew. So it's not just like mainly Syriac and every now and then one or two. It's kind of like maybe, let's say, I would say 3/4 Syriac, and then 1/4 is shared by the Gez and the Hebrew. That's my experience so far. And point being is that when we're looking at the second level and trying to figure it out with this assumption, this lens of Arabic, which is defined by the very people who are making up this fake tradition, right? So what are they going to make up alongside that when they're giving meaning to words, and the words, the roots radically differ from the sister Semitic languages? What we're dealing with is a fake language. It's Arabic, from Aravrev, Arab, comes from biblical Hebrew, which means mixed multitude. So Arab, I speak Arab, I speak mixed. I am Arab, I am mixed. I think a lot of what we have here is this fake history that has given us a lie that we're looking at an Arabic language as such proper, and that emerged from the Quranic textual tradition. The scholars then gave meaning to roots that weren't native to the Proto-Arabic different communities, the Safavidic, etc. All these played a part. But to try and like figure out the second level by applying this, like, oh, I'm an expert in Arabic. It's like, yeah, you studied very hard the people of the past who lied to you about what the text says and utilized the Arabic language as such as a mechanism to enable that. And you're very, very good at knowing the mechanism. It's not enough. It really isn't enough. To crack down to the first level, you have to go to the Uthmanic Rasim. You have to essentially, all the dots and diacritics and hamzas and alifs, inserted alifs, they're there to confuse you. They're there to make it say something it didn't originally, because why else would you need to add them? If what it said originally was clear enough, then leave it as such. But no, Allah apparently in his first initial rollout of the revelation wasn't clear enough. So we had to add the diacritics, we had to add the hamzas, in the 850s, or whenever exactly it was, right? So this is the whole point. There's a two-level situation here. So we can do these presentations where we show how on the second level, right? So we assume everything. We just take everything a priori. These are what the words mean, etc. Even then, it's not enough. Which is so great about Surah 97 is that the sin, the standard Islamic narrative, it falls apart on the base reading. You don't have to go that deep. It's pretty clear from the jump that it's not about whatever this hadith was talking about. It's not related to that at all. So that's just sort of laying out the current standing that I feel about the Quranic textual tradition, is that what we're dealing with here is a lot more brazen than even your imagination could come up with. You have to really assume almost the worst at every point in time, and then you'll start developing hermeneutics and understand the way that they write, how they identify roots, etc. But anyway, so this is a great example of not needing to break down that level, not needing to go to the Uthmanic and figure out what's going on here with the quote unquote Arabic. But instead, you can just show it, right? So you don't have to do the whole shebang of trying to explain magical Arabic and blah, 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 blah to get to the point of the first level. You can just show it as a second level obvious case of, I don't think this is about Hira.
Yeah, maybe when we figure out the original meaning of the surah, we find out why they couldn't actually hide the meaning, because based on everything that we've seen, you add the hamzas, you add the dots, and you know play with alifs as well, these sort of things, and then you come up with a very different meaning to what it was originally in there. You literally just make up words and make the verses say whatever it is that you want the verses to say. This one, the fact that it is that they haven't done a very good job. And maybe the reason is that the rasam that is in this surah happens to not be very friendly to adding
Flexible.
different dots, flexible, right? So maybe that's the case. Maybe it's because it happens later. We don't know. But maybe once we figure out more stuff, we can actually say, okay, so now we know why they did a very poor job at hiding the meaning in this surah, when there are lots that they have done a very good job. Abu Lahab is one of them. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's because they didn't want us to read what it was actually written in there. So it tells a completely fictitious story about a guy called Abu Lahab and his wife, and is basically a curse on that guy. Because, of course, you would need to have that story in the eternal tablets in heaven, because Abu Lahab was so important that nobody knows about him unless you go to the tafsirs. So these sort of things. So this one, they made a very, very poor job at really hiding the meaning. And I think they left too many of these keywords, and hopefully we'll figure out why. Maybe it's a timing issue and it just happened much later. Okay, so, and just as a quick summary of what we've seen, so Surah 97 is about a very important night. We have 3 verses out of 5 is just talking about something happening at night. And then when you're actually reading that and realize that the book is all about Jesus as the Messiah, and we've seen the Jesus and the Spirit everywhere, a person just starts to join the dots. Second thing is that the length and structure looks a lot like a Christmas carol. It's just 5, it rhymes, it's very repetitive with the first 3 verses, and it ends with peace is until the emergence of dawn. So it sounds very much like something of the sort. We looked at the tafsirs, and they try to explain away the night of Al-Qadr in ways that contradict what is written in that surah, like peace it is until the emergence of dawn and so on. When we look at the hadiths, the story of the night of Al-Qadr also contains elements that they are not in that surah. The hadiths are supposed to be the full explanation of everything, and instead of that, we have something very different. And just as a final comment, is that when we say that there is always more layers, or like Kash said, there are different layers to all of this, I think Christoph Luxemburg did not make a comment on this one. I can't remember reading that in his book, but Gabriel Sauma does, and he explains, like to a degree, rather he hints at the original Surah 97 being talking about the resurrection of Jesus instead of the birth. So this is something that Kash and I, we will explore in detail and see actually if he has the final solution, or if there's something else that he missed and maybe we can actually find it. But I found it interesting that if the original meaning of that verse, there are a few things mistranslated, and it was talking about the resurrection and birth, that means the hadiths, the tafsirs, and so on, they are fabrications. However, even if it was talking about the birth of Jesus, it would still all be a fabrication. That's why I think this surah is so interesting, because it doesn't really matter whether it is properly translated or not. It still debunks all of the other stories that have been created to explain it away, which of course they didn't really do it properly, at least in my humble opinion. What do you think, Kash?
JC, do you have permission to talk about the Qadr word?
Yeah, do whatever you want to do.
Okay, cool. So, so in terms of Salma's assertion about potentially being about the resurrection, I think he might be close but not right. My intuition is that it's about the crucifixion, actually, but it could be about the birth, and I'll explain. So the Qadr root You can look on Bible Hub. If you look for, let me see the exact Latinized spelling. Okay, it's very simple. Qadar. Qadr, as you would spell the Arabic transliteration. And this word in the Hebrew means to darken, right? Like the, during the crucifixion when the sun was blotted out. Okay, it's sort of almost connected there a little bit. But, and I think very crucially, the root or the word qadr also in the Hebrew, the biblical Hebrew, means to mourn, like we mourn the death of someone. So, therefore, I would think of it as a dual meaning, right? A pun, in a sense. You have the dual meaning of both to darken and to mourn. And darkening and mourning, when did that happen? During the crucifixion, during the passion. The sun was blotted out, and during the crucifixion, of course, we mourn the death of our Lord. So that's why my intuition goes towards that this is about the crucifixion. However, and I will say this is the fact that it then takes the meaning of predestination, right? In the Islamic tradition, qadr means, predestination becomes a whole pillar of Islam and all that, right? The idea of predestination in this context could refer to the idea that the night of mourning and darkening was actually his birth because it was all written for him. As in some sort of esoterical way, because it was all God's plan, therefore he died when he was born. Or it was already determined that he would die when he was born, therefore birth. But, I'll still sort of say my gut leans towards that this is all about the night of the crucifixion.
Well, you said before that you had some problems, like for example, with the word, was it a thousand? Like you said that I have a problem with that one. I have a problem with every word in here, including nights and months and the whole thing. I do think that it is very grossly mistranslated. But the point making
Month, the
on
word
this
for
is,
month, yeah, like the word for month, for example, it's attested in like every other Semitic language, if I recall correctly, as dawn or morning, the first time of the day, right? So for it's in the Arabic to then suddenly mean something like the a month, right? I think that this has implications also for the Ramadan, right? You should fast the whole month. Excuse me, sir. I need a hadith to fix this. I can't actually fast the whole month. I will die, right? So the whole month of Ramadan is implicated also in the question of whether Shara actually means month, right? Or rather dawn. Because if someone told me to fast for dawn, I'm like, okay, I'll skip breakfast. Fine. It's totally manageable, right? But anyway, that'll have to be for another video.
yeah. So when we talk, for example, about the backbone and the ribs, that one, the approach is like, well, do you see, this is actually very, very silly. God wouldn't say this. Even the Bedouins wouldn't say this. So let's look into it. And then we go into the Syria kind of stuff and figure out, oh, this is what has happened. And the same thing happens with much of the Quran. When we get to this one, the same thing will happen. If we do, when we dig into it, we see, okay, this word is wrong. This one is from Hebrew. This one also, they put the diacritics willy-nilly, the hamzas. So all of those things. So it will say something else. But the interesting thing is that even without any of that, you just look at this and it contradicts every single piece of work they have created to justify it. This is what I find so interesting about this one. Like the tafsirs don't make sense with this, the hadiths don't make sense with this, even Sharia contradicts everything that had come before it. Even just taking this as the Arabic, you can show to any, well, Muslims, they will say, no, is what the tafsir writer said. And it's like, well, it isn't. But if you show this to any Christian, they are going to say, why are you saying that this is about the cave of Hira? This is not talking about the cave of Hira. In fact, it would probably say cave or something. And like we said before, in the verses that talk about Ramadan, it doesn't talk about Al Qadr. So there are all of these different problems in just 5 little verses that contradict every single piece of work that they've done to justify them. So I find it interesting for that reason. It's very different to the rest of the Quran, where you have to really dig into exactly what it means and all of these problems and the Syriac to get a proper rendering and then say, you see, this is what it really said. This one, the Arabic already contradicts everything, which I think is quite
Yeah,
interesting.
JC, I get the feeling I've seen videos where God Logic would read Isaiah 53 and ask the caller on the show, okay, so I just read Isaiah 53. Who do you think that's referring to? And then the response is Muhammad, and even themselves they start laughing because of how absurd it is, right? It's I get that same feeling when you were bringing up the fact that it's so clear on base text, right? So you would read this and you'd say, okay, who does that sound like? And if you read Surah 19, surely you know who is the one where it is peaceful until the uprising of dawn, right? So you would get the connection, right? So for them to read this and I'm reading Muhammad into the text, like this is a great effort. This is a great work. Maybe that work of reading Muhammad into the text will be multiplied by 1,000x on the day of Qadr, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more you think about this, the worse it gets. This surah is talking about something that you don't know what it is, that is better than 1,000 months. And it doesn't talk about Muhammad. It doesn't talk about Allah. It doesn't talk about, um, what is it, the cave of Hira. It really doesn't tell you anything. I think maybe they didn't really change it that much because they thought, well, this is vague enough. And now we're going to read Muhammad and his stories right into it. But I think they should have made a better effort at hiding some things. Certainly not peace it is until the emergence of dawn. Maybe they should have changed that to horrors it is until the emergence of dawn or something.
Or
But
Islam it is until the emergence of dawn, because they would just have to write. I think I just add an alif, right? And then they get submission. It is until the uprisal of dawn. But I think that they would probably get less followers to their religion. But yeah, they could
right.
have done that.
Um, well, so I think for this quick video on something that we had discussed before, I think it illustrates a few important things. Particularly when we take something a little bit outside of the Quran and we look at tafsirs and hadiths, that just like Akash said, we're not very happy with those because we know it's pretty much coping and trying to explain something they didn't quite understand. So, but this one was like a quick video to actually show some of those things because it's the easiest part of the Quran that can be explained in this manner. And yeah, and we will actually be back then next week with different shows. We're having a couple of people that are going to be joining us here on the studio to actually talk about parts of the research. So hopefully we will start that from next week. So you have other voices to hear as well, and other areas of research, because ours is pretty much about the Quran and trying to figure out the language in the book. But people are actually doing other areas of research that explain some verses better, that tells us a little bit more about the history, and that we find it quite important to actually understand the background of how the Quran became the book that it is, and so on. So it cannot be approached simply by looking at, okay, let's translate the whole thing into Syriac and see what happens. It's not that simple, and it cannot actually be done. But by understanding the history and the stories that are in there and a lot more, I think we will get there one piece at a time. So stay tuned for those shows. Hopefully we will start those from next week, and that you will find these topics that our guests are going to show as interesting as I find them. And I think, Kaz, you find them as well quite interesting too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry, you cut off at the last part, so I didn't exactly hear you. However, I will say, okay, guys, I'm doing this against JC's advice. Go and look at manuscripts for this surah, okay? Look at the word for angels, all right? It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a fun adventure. All four of you listening, have a look. It's gonna be fun. So we're gonna in due time talk about this surah. Probably not for a while, but eventually we'll get back to it, and I think it'll be fun.
Right. So, Kaz, would you like to say some final words before we switch it off and we call it a day?
Yeah, I think this was a great stream. I really enjoyed the interactions with LA Apologetics and Joshua here in the chat. Thank you all for your attention and your engagement. It's been really good. And it's been an hour again. I thought this was going to be a shorter one, but we have a consistency for our streams, it seems.
Yeah, it's actually working quite well in that manner. So at least we're not going with 4 hours just yet again, but it will happen. But anyway, this is all for today, folks. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for interacting with the chat and the likes and the subscribes and all of that very good stuff. It really helps us show to people more and more about what the Quran says and trying to drive attention to the Quran and a little bit away from things like hadiths and tafsirs and things that happen later. So we want as many people as possible to be looking at the Quran. So thank you very much for your help and your support. And stay tuned for next week. We will have a few other very interesting things being discussed on Monday and then Thursday, if everything goes according to plan. So until then, stay well, have a lovely weekend, and God bless you all. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie!
26 of the Quran.
26 different Quran!
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?